All right, this is Rules for Radicals, changing the culture of Python at Facebook. My name is Jason Freed. I'm a production engineer at Facebook and Instagram. I started at Facebook on Halloween, October 2011. When I started at Facebook, Perl had been my language of choice for the previous 6 years. So I had to teach myself Python since it was the more socially acceptable language at Facebook, more than Perl was. It took about a year until I was confident as a new Python programmer to start taking an active role in Python at Facebook. So for me, I initially got started by helping people out on the internal Python group, being the first to answer questions, and I became internally famous in Python circles for being that guy that could help you out. Python at Facebook became my favorite side project. And sometimes it became like more important than my primary work. But when I saw an issue in a place where I could do some good, I would do it. I would fix them. And over time, people started to accept my expertise. This is how most of Facebook works. It's not a top-down hierarchy of this is how we're going to do technology. It's more it's a growth from the bottom. It's a meritocracy of ideas. You have to kind of sway public opinion by the merits of your ideas alone, or try to use the social capital you've gained by helping people out to convince them of your ideas. So kind of a primer on how Facebook's a little different. This is like a micro version of my talk I give to new hires at Facebook. So Python at Facebook is not as simple as deploying a script and running it. We have, like everybody, we have problems with dependency management. So instead of baking a bunch of virtual environments and deploying them via Chef to a bunch of servers, and then hoping that engineers keep them up to date for the various software applications that use them, Facebook solved it a different way by creating something called a PAR. So a PAR is, or short for Python archive, is all the code for a thing, service, a utility, whatever, and combined with all of its libraries it's using, all the third-party dependencies and all the SOs. And we bake them into a little package. We attach a shell script to the top of it, and it allows you to run it, and it will extract and execute the entry point you specify. We use these much like C++ developers. We build them much like C++ developers build their applications. We create build configs that list all the source files, all the internal libraries, all the third-party dependencies, and our build system, Buck, then builds all these dependencies together, figures out which ones need to be compiled, like thrift specs or what have you, puts them all together, builds this PAR for us. It means most developers control the dependencies very tightly. They are associated to the application, like they should be, instead of being associated with the system in which they run. We are then able to take these PARs, and we can ship them to any server at Facebook, and they will run, and it'll execute. Now that you have some understanding of the language I'm going to use, I'm probably going to use PAR a lot, or Python binary. Let's move on to the topic at hand. So changing something at a company as large as Facebook takes time. So let me tell you a story about how, during my free time, I made Python 3 the default version at Facebook. In 2013, at the same time we were getting access to Python 2.7, we were also getting access to Python 3.3. Access being a very crude word. It was a part of a task that happened in 2012, the very end of 2012. Somebody put a task in to add Python 3 support to the build system. That just meant adding the binaries so they were deployed on every machine. The task stalled out in late 2012, and it was blocked on adding Python 3 support to all of our internal libraries. I think at the time they were in an argument where they would just automatically run 2 to 3, and it fell apart. And as you can think, we were nowhere near being able to run Python 3. This didn't get us a lot. This is kind of like installing Python 3 in your laptop and not knowing where it's at and saying, oh, I'm using Python 3 now. But so we had access to it, but we really couldn't use it yet. Nothing had support for it. It was all still very theoretical. And it also didn't help that the popular opinion of Python 3 at Facebook in 2013 was very negative. Most people at the company thought we're just going to stay in Python 2 forever. There's no reason for us to ever change. And some talked about leaving the language altogether and going to something like D or Go or something along those lines. And even I was among them. I said something along these lines internally once. In my defense, it looked very hopeless in 2013 that we'd ever be able to run Python 3 in production. At the time, only one person, only one, called me out on the statement, and he challenged me to do something about it. He's like, well, if you don't do anything, nothing will happen. So you see, change won't happen unless you make it happen. Waiting around for somebody to fix all this shit, it's just never going to happen. So though it wasn't all bad, we had a few things going for us. We had some rays of hope. In January of 2013, okay, my screen looked crazy. In January 2013, we had employed these, the 4 infamous future import rules, and we had a linter in place to make sure that they were always required to be in your code. These things are pretty much used everywhere at Facebook now. It's been there since 2013. Everybody just uses them to shut the linter up. And so early on, we had to solve our Unicode issues. We had to solve our issues with all the various, absolute imports and the print function. We introduced new issues. People started writing functions that would accept Python string or Unicode, and they would use base string for is-instance checking because they were accepting both string and Unicode. These imports would later make it very easy at the time to convert modules to Python 3. We'd find out later. But that leads us to Thrift. So Thrift is a remote procedure call that a procedure call system and serialization framework that we built at Facebook and we open sourced under the Apache umbrella. It is used extensively at Facebook. It allows services to talk to each other. And it allows the PHP application writers on the front end to access backend services written in C++ or even Python and not having to write everything in PHP. So it allowed us to grow. So it was a very, very important service. But it was one of those core dependencies that everybody used and had to work for Python 3 to be realized at Facebook. And on October 15th of 2013, the Thrift team put up a poll internally to see if anybody was interested in them adding Python 3 support. Later I was to find that basically they had a new hire and they were trying to figure out something for him to do. Well, that was 13 months after the 2012 Python 3 support task had stalled out. And there were a few people that thought that Python 3 support was a waste of time, that we didn't need it. But a majority, strange enough, voted yes, that we should have a Python 3 version. I voted yes because I had hoped that if they did a Python 3 refactor, it would clean up a lot of things I was unhappy with about the Python support in Thrift that I thought was ugly. And that was my opinion until this guy. On October 16th of 2013, Guido von Rossum gave a talk at Yelp in San Francisco about Tulip, which would then become Async.io. A group of us Facebookers, we carpooled down or up to the city to see the talk. This was the day after the Thrift poll landed. I was already a fan of Async.io and Python 2. I was a G-Event user, and I already knew the pains of when I wrote a library using G-Event and some guy was using Twisted, I had to write a library in Twisted. So, but Async.io in my head opened up this magical future where different async frameworks could all have interoperability. They could all back into Async.io and then hopefully maybe communicate with themselves. Where library writers didn't have to make the religious decision of Tornado, Twisted, or G-Event, where it would be left up to the users of our libraries to make that decision. Well, before the talk was over, I was already on Facebook and I was hounding the Thrift team to be like, you guys need to support Tulip. Instead of, they were like, well, we'll have to wait till G-Event and Twisted have support in Python 3 because we have that support in Python 2. It was like, no, you should drop support for that and you should start supporting Tulip now. Because I basically made the argument that it won't matter that you have native support for Twisted or G-Event. In the future, they'll be able to interact with your library written in the more raw Async.io. After Guido's talk, I was very pumped for the future of Python. I was on the team, Python 3, ready to go, let's go. And on October 19th of 2013, a couple days later, the Thrift team posted their project plan for their new hire, and immediately the top line was Tulip support. So this was the Thrift for Python 3 became my side project. I was like, I'm going to help that guy make this happen. So this was the first attempt to change something else at Facebook that I did not have direct control over. and 2014 would see me do a lot more of these types of things. Well, if I wanted people to use Python 3 and Tulip at Facebook, we would have to make the thing at least possible. So we'd have to do a lot of groundwork. So I aided the Thrift team with code reviews and porting help for Python 3. And by February 3rd of 2014, we had shipped Python 3 support for Thrift internally. Well, for 6 months, it sat. It sat unused. We had built this infrastructure, but nobody was using it. It was like those cities in China built during explosive urbanization and economic growth, but left abandoned when they couldn't convince people to move to them. I don't think we had a plan yet at the time of when we were going to get people to use Python 3, but we just had built it and hoping somebody would show up and make use of it. This was all about to change. I had been maintaining a system called FEpackage 2. FEpackage came about as a way to solve the problem of distributing code at Facebook. It was to our front-end servers. We were using rsync fanout, and that would take an hour. And like, that's too slow. So FEpackage used BitTorrent to distribute packages, and it allowed us to, and it also allowed you to asynchronously, like some other time later, request a package to be downloaded. It didn't have to happen at the time you released, like the rsync did. It became very popular. It was written in Python, and well, by 2013, it was already at least 5 years old, and it had not really aged well. Due to various reasons I don't want to go into, because they're numerous, probably as much as the tape on this box, and it really needed to be fixed. I could see a scaling cliff for it, and it was going to fall over it, and we were going to have a lot of problems. So instead of putting yet another piece of tape on this box or putting a ribbon on it and saying, hey, it's a new system, I decided we needed a complete rewrite. The existing code was just not worth fixing anymore, so we needed a new box. Got a new box. So in August of 2014, I started a project to rewrite the service that I had become the misfortunate owner of. FPKG was going to be a complete rewrite of the existing service, use modern infrastructure and modern best practices. I wanted the service to last for many years to come and be free of the crushing technical debt that had strangled its predecessor. And I was going to write it in Python 2 and G-Event. Wait, but I want there to be a future of Python. So it dawned on me that if I wrote this service using Python 2, it would be obsolete from day one. That I would be baking into it a technical debt of us having to convert it to Python 3 at some point in the future. So like I said, change won't happen on its own. Somebody has to be the first, and that person should be you. Facebook and Python 3, that person was going to be me. In the words of Gandhi, be the change you want to see. If I wanted Python 3 to be a thing at Facebook, I would have to be that change. And I was about to become the driving force of Python 3 at Facebook. So I started writing FEPKG in Python 3. And everything was broken. No wonder nobody was using Python 3 at Facebook. So I wrote our initial build config, like I was talking earlier, for my PAR. I put it together. I ran build. It didn't build. The build system treated Python 3 like it was 2.8 in disguise. The dependency tree refused to resolve, all because of all the third-party dependencies that I was trying to use were, at the time, by default, added as being Python 2 only. So the person who added them didn't have to worry about trying to make it compile to be supported for Python 3. And the thrift support that we had landed, well, it was broken by Python 2 only regressions that had been filing in for those 6 months that nobody noticed because nobody was using it. And then all of our Swig and Boost wrappers were and probably still are fundamentally broken for Python 3 in regards to handling binary data. And when I resolved enough issues to get my PAR to finally build, it traced back immediately on startup. So it turned out it wasn't my code, it was the base machinery that make PAR files work was broken in Python 3. So it was like the entire universe was broken. So while I was writing FEPKG, I was fixing the world, at least as much as the world as I needed for Python 3. I rebuilt hundreds of third-party modules for our build system to tell it, hey, this thing's actually Python 3, or I upgraded to a new version that was supported by Python 3. And if I needed a library to do anything like at Facebook, you're going to talk to an existing library somebody's written. Well, those were not Python 3. They may have the future imports, but that didn't mean they're going to work. So I had to convert them to 2.3 polyglot as I went along. But I had a problem every day. Somebody would commit a Python 3 support regression into my dependency tree of something, or upgrade a third-party module and tell the build system, oh, it only works for Python 2. But the version before it, I had said, oh, no, this is fine. I researched it. It works for both, and tested it. So it was not fun. So there gets to be a point where you kind of have to like force people to stop breaking you all the time. Well, most of the regressions was code that, while valid in Python 2, was a syntax error or a name error in Python 3, simple enough. So I had to force compliance somehow. So now, I said before, Facebook's not this kind of company where you can top-down control and say, this is the way we're going to do it. But sometimes us engineers at the bottom, we can force a certain level of compliance if you handle it just right. And I learned quickly, if you acted with authority, people would assume you had it. Which I didn't. Well, I think I used up a good portion of my social capital in 2014 and relied on my perceived status as the Python subject matter expert. But so in late August of 2014, I instituted a new automatic PyFlakes linter that would run on all new code when it goes up for review. PyFlakes was a good pick because it didn't have any false positives, or didn't have many false positives. And I could sell it as improving our code quality. This wasn't just for Python 3, it's improving code quality. And since we already had a PEP8 linter and we had the 4 imports linter, nobody really objected to me adding one more. So then, so what I also did is I made this PyFlakes linter run under Python 3 and then run under Python 2, so that we'd get linting on both, and it would register these syntax errors or name errors for Python 3. And in effect, people that were not writing Python 3 code were required by the linter to not commit broken Python 3 code. So in effect, I was training them to write Python 3 compliant code, well, sort of, but this allowed me to distribute the job of maintaining Python 3 compatibility so I could focus on my project and get it shipped. And linting was powerful, but still linting doesn't really protect you. You really need unit tests. And so for these libraries I was using that I would have to convert to Python 3 or 2.3, and I would ensure that their unit tests ran both on Python 2 and on Python 3, so that when they did their own updates to it and they broke Python 3, they'd get this nice big fat unit test error. So they would know they broke it during their code review. I found that using unit tests was way easier than filing a task to fix a regression after the fact. Most people didn't care. But if you had it right there up there, like, oh, I broke something immediately, and they'll fix it. It was always easy for people. It wasn't always easy for people. I had to become responsive to people's cries for help. I couldn't just ignore them. At first, I spent a lot of time fixing people's Python 3 lint warnings. They would come into the channel and they'd be like, hey, this thing doesn't make any sense. And I'd spend a lot of time explaining that name error, Unicode is not defined, is not a false positive, but an actual legitimate lint error for Python 3, and explain why they should care, because if supporting Python 3 seemed hard, people wouldn't bother. They would regress to well, let's just stay in Python 2, it's easy. And they would get stuck in that mindset. So I ended up making it really simple to write 2.3 code at Facebook. I patched the build system so that every par that got built would automatically pull in the third-party modules, 6 and future. That way, they were universally available as if it was standard lib. That allowed people to write pretty 2.3 code for their project without having to do all the try except messiness. And they could do it without having to modify their build configs. The moment it's like, you modify your build config, pull this thing in, then you can use it. They're like, oh, that's too much. And you're like, but if you just, it's already there, it's already in your dependencies, just use it, they'll do it. And one of the other things that was hounding me was, I was talking about the third-party system, or third-party dependency management system. It would think that you were using Python 2 by default. It was like, it would give you config, you'd customize it, and it would take Python version equal 2. Well, I fixed these defaults to make sure that when people would import new modules, the build template that would come up would say for Python 2 and Python 3. And that would remove the time for me the time-consuming process of having to rebuild those modules later to enable Python 3 support that was already there. With these things in place, we were no longer losing ground in Python 3, but we were still not really gaining any ground. I had joined the teaching rotation in 2014 for a new hire class that we called Python at Facebook. It informed new engineers of the realities of Python at Facebook and prepared them for the gotchas that might stand in their way and prepare them for, so they wouldn't spin their wheels. They could actually get some work done. Because of the linters were already in place, the class already instructed engineers that they were expected to write 2.3 code. So that was a little win. I didn't even write that slide. Somebody wrote it for me. Because one day in the distant future, we always had this thing, we'll switch to Python 3 in the future. That future always seemed to get further out. Well, writing Python 2.3 code and only ever running it in Python 2 means it's probably only ever Python 2 code. So it wasn't enough to advance Python 3 at Facebook telling them to write 2.3 code. So we wanted to get to a future where people wrote Python 3 for new code and would only write 2.3 code when supporting legacy systems. It would never just write 2 code. So in 2015, I took matters into my own hands. I made a change to the class slides and informed the other instructors that this is what we're going to do. And I changed the slides for the class and said that all new code at Facebook, in my soapbox, should be written in Python 3. That you should never write Python 2 code unless it is a legacy project. And even then it should be 2.3 code because either the project will die or one day we will convert that project to Python 3. We taught them to expect things to just work. We didn't complain that it was going to be hard. We just said, it'll work. If it doesn't work, file a task, complain, fix it yourself. And that's what happened. So this came to this statement, and I kept saying it so much I kind of liked it. It was educate for the future you want, not the present you have. I started using this to justify my use of the class as propaganda to the other teachers. Hell, most of the core dependencies had already been converted in 2014. So everything should have worked. All we really needed was people to use them to make sure they didn't regress. So the rest of 2015 wasn't really that eventful for the whole initiative. I still had my day job, and I spent it selling FPPKG as a replacement for FE Package 2, having announced it that January. But something strange happened in 2016. I switched team to a brand new team that was dedicated to shepherding Python at Facebook. This is like my dream job. Now, there was only 2 of us so far, but having the team name alone added a lot of validity to our efforts. When I would suggest that we should do something, people, he's on the Python team, I should listen to them. Still, no real control or real power. We saw a slow but steady growth of Python 3 after we started teaching people that that's what they're expected to write. Internal discussions were commonly about Python 3. People were every day we'd hear about some new service someone had written using Python 3. And it was obvious that the tide of public opinion had shifted. No longer had the anti-Python 3 crowd ruled supreme. They were in the minority. Them like the anti-IPv6 crowd, they had to sit in the corner, But Python 3.
You're on IPv6?
What was that?
What did you say? IPv6? Like that is a thing?
That's the thing at Facebook. We're only IPv6 now. So, but using Python 3 was growing, even though the default version of the build system was still 2. You had to go out of your way to say, I want to be Python 3. And you had to know. You had to know that this code was not going to be running on Python 2, so you had to select it. We even used to say that Python 2 will probably always be the default Python. Well, not anymore. On May 2nd, 2016, I made a post expressing my intent to make Python 3 the default version of the build system. This is kind of how you approve changes. You throw it out there, see if anybody bitches at you, and you do it or not. One of the arguments that was using a legacy version of Python, I get back on my soapbox, for new projects was a waste of company money. Since any project started with Python 2 would at some point have to be upgraded to Python 3, you're spending twice as much for the same code. So why not save the technical debt and use modern Python to begin with? The post received unanimous support, which is surprising. I was expecting some trolls to come out of the woodwork. But so by May 5th, I had modded all the existing Python 2 build configs in our system to indicate that they were using a legacy version of Python, and then I was able to make Python 3 the default version at Facebook. With the millions of lines of Python code and the thousands of pars, I didn't break anything. Nobody seemed to notice. It was just the next logical thing to do. So we started out in Q3. That was when I started FPGA. In 2014, we had four pars. One was the Python 3 flakes, PyFlakes linter. The other three were part of my service. That didn't change until Q2 of 2015. We had one more guy come around for our wormhole service. Sadly, we didn't maintain statistics for that year. But 2 days after I made the switch from the default, one of my coworkers put in place a automatic stats grabber that would go through, read every source file, and it would tell us how many of our par configs were Python 3. And we were surprised to see that we had already had 4% of all Python pars at Facebook were Python 3. And by Q3 of this year, we had reached 10% of all pars. The green line here is basically my fudge because I don't have the data. I didn't really have time to go through and do this manually because the stat grab couldn't go back in time. So I just did a linear progression. So pretty much growth rate for that time is kind of unknown. But I would say it's a success. You know, we've gone from being impossible to people just do it and don't even realize it. So we now have Python 3 pars widely distributed since 2015. We're pretty sure we have the largest async I/O deployment. It's running on hundreds of thousands of machines. We're growing at 0.5% week over week for Python 3 over Python 2. And it's now generally expected that Python 3 will just work. Only the most crusty libraries at Facebook don't have Python 3 support yet. Many teams are giving up supporting Python 2 and moving forward. Even those that were once the most hardline anti-Python 3 people are actually come around. And they're admitting that Python 3 is actually pretty cool. So in our timeline of change, it was impossible at one point, highly unlikely in 2014, somewhat in 2015. And by default, 2016, we just kind of jumped right in there. So the future of Python at Facebook is as bright as ever. Calls to replace Python with some other language are few and far between. So let's review. If you want to change something, you got to lay the groundwork. Don't just say we should move to Python 3. Make it a possibility, you yourself. Change has to start with somebody, and it should be you. Pick Python 3 first for your projects. Don't do it alone. Get people to help you. That's the kind of linter comes into play there. Even if they don't know they're helping you. If you're not currently training your new hires, you should start, and you should train them for what you want to be the reality. And definitely collect some statistics. I make this mistake every time. I do this from great change, and then I try to find statistics at the end. And you got to keep statistics so you know how you're progressing. So this is where I work. Facebook paid for me to come here and to talk at this conference. And I would like to tell you that we're always hiring. You can go to facebook.com/careers, or if you want, you can talk to me. So these are questions.
Does the PAR thing you talked about, is that something you guys have open sourced?
So I didn't say answers. No, I'm just kidding. We have not. For the longest time, it was very highly tied into a build system that we were not going to release. Now that Buck is out and we open source that, we're probably going to open source something, but it probably won't be the pars that I was working with in this slide. It will be the better version. It's just like PEX, if you think about it, except we also have SOs in our Python executables.
What's PEX?
PEX is short for Python executable. It's an open source project. I'm trying to remember who put it out, but basically it's along the same lines. Like Google had something, Facebook had something because those guys went to Facebook. And then at some point, PEX became a thing. And Buck in open source makes PEXs. The problem with PEX is you can't put an SO in it. And we have some stuff internally that basically extracts SOs, and then we run all the Python code via zip importer.
I want to change the subject to back at the very beginning. You said you're a Perl guy. Why did Perl die, and what is it that our world should be thinking about to prevent us from facing the same fate? And one answer is that's not allowed is that it's like an inferior language.
Oh, I wouldn't think it was an inferior
Yeah,
language.
that's right. That's what people
It had a very bad opinion for people who weren't Perl people. Like they couldn't, I can't read that. And you're like, and I was like, well, I wrote good code. I can read that, and I can explain to you to read it, and I can read it next week. But I think personally, I'm probably completely wrong. I think that, the public opinion was bad, but also the Python 6 story was Perl 6, sorry. Perl 6 was really, like, the story for that was complete shit. It was always, it'll be here. No one knew what it was. Like, the language is dead. And we almost did that in Python, but we actually released a Python 3. So they never released a Perl 6. It was like, whoever releases it first, they're Perl 6. And I was like, that's kind of lazy. But yeah, I would say there is a little renaissance happening now that they actually shipped Python 6, Perl 6. But, I don't know. It's pretty low on the list now. And it was just never a favorite amongst engineers at Facebook, so it didn't do very well there.
It's cool, though. Way better than Java in the 90s.
All right. Any other questions?
Can you discuss a bit about how you got onto the training team, and did you just seek it out? And then when did you decide to evangelize, use it as a platform?
So I think it was. Oh, sorry. When did I join the training team, and when did I decide to use it as a propaganda tool? And did I seek out being on there? So I believe it was 2014, I didn't know the class even took place. It didn't exist when I started. So the two guys that started, you probably recognize one, Moshe Zadok. He's from Twisted fame. He started the class with another engineer, and they needed some other person to come on to teach it. And because I'd been building up this kind of fame, people knew my name. They're like, oh, let's get Jason to teach this class. So I joined on board to teach the class, and just kind of gave it as is. It wasn't till, I guess, 2015, when we were trying to how do we move forward? It's like, well, let's just tell people to write Python 3 to begin with and see what happens. And it seemed to work out.
How much did that class improve the knowledge of the incoming people and kind of set that standard?
The question was how much did that class improve the incoming knowledge of Python 3 for incoming people? We went over a lot of stuff. We added a section on the Unicode gotcha that everybody seems to have for Python 3. And the guy teaches it with me now. He put that in there to show people that, he has a Polish name, so his first letter is got a special character in it. And without Unicode, he can't board airplanes. So it did a lot. I think just telling people in their minds. So in Python 3 as a community at large, we for a while we've had this from the subject matter experts we can look to, and they're like, oh, Python 3 is shit. It's too hard. But they're talking about really hard problems, and really hard problems. It may be hard to convert to Python 3, but just telling these new hires from a position of authority, oh, it should just work. That cleared their mind of a preconceived notion that this is going to be hard, so they didn't make it harder on themselves. So I believe it helped a lot. That was probably the key moment. So that by the time in 2016 when we made the change, it was kind of like, how come we haven't done this already? It was like people were showing up. I was telling the guy next to me, he's like, there's 5 extra Python 3 services now than there were last week. And he was like, yeah, everybody's using it now. So we might as well update the defaults. Any other questions?
Did you get any flack that some of the changes were delaying people's projects or taking longer to implement?
Yeah, that always happens. Sorry, the question was, did I get any flack for when I put all these new restrictions for delaying projects? Yes, that happens. They didn't usually come at me. People don't go and dig to find out who implemented a linter. And I just kind of announced that it had been released, but people don't always see those announcements. They just the code and they get the lint warning and they're like, what the hell is this? And they post in the internal group and then I was there to help them. So hopefully the idea is that they would not be delayed. That's what I was saying. I was very receptive. I spent a lot of time fixing people's lint errors. Yeah, so most people were also complaining about the PEP 8 linter. So they were like, this is slowing me down. So like when the Flake 8 linter or the Pie Flakes linter was running, they really didn't care. Like some people complained. Most people just did it to shut the linter up.
You're doing Pie linter stuff. Could you go in there and change the error messages to say, here's how you want to do it here at Facebook?
We probably could have, but there would be very verbose because those messages show up in our code review, and they would have made it really nasty to do code review.
Somewhat unrelated, but do you ever do any soft linters, like a code style linter or something like that?
The question is, do we ever do any soft linters like code style? You mean like formatting? Like formatting for you? Initially not. We did PEP 8 and we just complained at you and you didn't wrap correctly or what have you. But recently, probably in 2016, we tried to do the yet another Python formatter. We basically submitted patches for them to do a Python, do a Facebook variant of how we wanted the style. And it did good for a while. Somebody somewhere, because we don't always have time to fix it, somebody injected a bug that would the thing would come back and it would delete all your code and be like, okay, that's good. And you're like, what? And some people would just hit yes, format, and they were like, why is my file empty? So we had to take it out for a while. I think it's back in recently, but yeah, we're very it's very cutting edge, to use that. Not cutting edge, but it's very new.
Back on that, like when you said when you did the Python relinting, no one really cared, they just fixed it because it was easy to fix now. Do you have the same kind of thing? My problem is I get a lot of pushback on code style, so it's kind of why.
Pretty much we offered the automatic code style. I'm sorry, did we have pushback on the Python 3 lint?
You take the style guide and then you automate it once you use something like YAP, so it's like you're just...
Oh, did we get pushback from using YAP? YAP, we had an opt-in system for YAP. Since all of our build configs are also Python, we turned it on for default for the build configs and certain other files, and projects could opt into it. But mostly we would tell people, hey, if they would complain about the PEP 8 linter, be like, hey, can we disable these 12 rules in PEP 8 because I don't like them for some reason? We were like, well, just stop complaining and use YAP and leave us alone. Any other questions?